The laws of the damned, what are they? These social contracts are among the most instrumental glues which bind the sects together, albeit there is a wide range of heated debate among the damned as to which is the superior and need be adhered to. These laws of the damned are made up of the traditions, the Code of Milan, the Status Perfectus, and the traditions of Caine, within each of which there is an incredible degree of depth to be dug into, just given their very nature. As with the traditions or the Code of Milan, how they are interpreted or regulated comes down to the given vampire tasked with both the privilege and responsibility of enforcing them. Be that the prince of a given Camarilla domain, the archbishop of a Sabbat city, or the baron or perhaps a gang of anarchs in their turf. To start out, we will cover the traditions of the Camarilla, both the official and the unspoken, as it is they who are the largest sect, as well as the one which counts the most vampires among their ranks, but also because, more often than not, new players and first-time storytellers experience their first brush with the laws of the damned in a Camarilla setting. Founded in 1493, the Camarilla would put into effect the traditions by which the kindred of their domains would be expected to heed. Naturally, this caused some fallings out by the likes of those vampires who would balk at the thought of such traditions being implemented into vampire society. These same vampires would go on to show their defiance in the subsequent destruction of the city at which the convention had been held at and named for, the City of Thorns. Now, what were these traditions? Well, certainly most of you may already know, but nevertheless, allow me to cite them for you so that we might progress. The first tradition, the Masquerade. The second tradition, the Domain. The third tradition, the Progeny. The fourth tradition, the Accounting. The fifth tradition, Hospitality. And the sixth tradition, Destruction. These 6 simple traditions were to be the cornerstone for the sect and be the granite base upon which they would build their influence. Deferring to the mindset that it was best to err on the side of pragmatism and cultivate their power in the shadows of the mortal world to prevent the same turbulence which had caused their sect to form. The result of the traditions has quite frankly led to the most stable and secure domains the children of Caine have ever known. The union of the clans, not merely culturally, but behind similar and equally accountable and agreed upon law, has ensured the sect's dominance on the world stage by night. Yet one would be forgiven to think that these, merely being the rules you were expected not to break, was all they were. The tragic reality is that it has become commonplace for new players and storytellers, similarly to boons, to neglect or lack a complete understanding about the traditions, thinking of them as either the way by which the Camarilla oppresses its neonates, and focusing too heavily upon that, or as an unspoken rule that should they be broken, you can expect to have the enforcers of Camarilla law come down upon you like wanted levels in a GTA game. It's unfortunate, because for players it means that they are once again missing out on a potent, if not invaluable resource, and for storytellers, that they lose the chance to introduce an added flair and depth of atmosphere to their city, to complement the story they are trying to tell. And what's more, if you happen to be an ambitious player like myself, or as a storyteller you wish to run a chronicle highlighting the deep, neo-feudal politics and Machiavellian plots, then you have effectively cut out 2/4, if not a third, of your resources. Allow me to explain. The traditions of the Camarilla are not an ethereal red tape that, once broken, invites the kindred authorities to break down your front door. They, just as with boons, contacts, allies, and retainers, are another potent resource and benefit at your and every other Camarilla kindred's disposal. The reason for this is threefold. First, the traditions are not static, as some might presume. While the initial 6 are fixed, as I've said, their interpretation and regulation is both the privilege and responsibility of the prince. For instance, the accidental insanguination of a mortal in Chicago might not even be considered a risk to the Masquerade, so long as no signs of your feasting or other supernatural influence is left behind. In Vancouver, however, such a thing is regardlessly punished by final death. Where in a city like New York the tradition of domain is sufficiently lax, given the city's abundance of mortals and the sheer magnitude of the city's borders permit for greater spaces for the damned to hunt and establish their havens, new kindred are always welcomed if occasionally scrutinized. Whereas in New Orleans, the tradition of domain under the late great Prince Marcel, and yes, I disagree that he was a tyrant and am prepared to debate with anyone who would attempt to say otherwise, the tradition of domain was enforced much more conservatively, so to control the flow and residence of kindred within his domain more cautiously. When considering how a prince might interpret and thus regulate the traditions in his domain, it is often important to understand the properties of that domain. In this way, not only can you better reflect the nature of the city's atmosphere and politics in your chronicles, but add a depth to the city's world building. A fantastic example of this is presented in the city of Las Vegas, where the Right Honorable Prince Benedict has, due to the circumstances of his domain, imposed an additional tradition onto the subjects of his dominion. That being, that no kindred can play poker. Ah, now surely this is an example of the prince's tyranny, isn't it? No, and it would be rather cheap and stale if that were all it was. The reason behind it being that Vegas hosts the annual World Championship Poker Tournament, which anyone who can cover the $10,000 entry fee is permitted to join, and as such, a talented kindred poker player might draw all kinds of attention. Now, yes, the Anarchs might and do rage against this and call it excessive, but there lies the depth of the thing again. It is not merely just some prince trying to be oppressive for the sake of being some cartoonish tyrant. It is a prince who has his reasons, which many can understand. This introduces a layer of nuance and spice to the setting. If players want to debate the validity of the tradition, then they are encouraged to. In fact, as we shall soon talk about, maybe they should. What's more, this serves to highlight how a prince may decree a new tradition in their city if they feel the need. These are not typically given out without good reason either, as commonly, though it depends on the city, the prince often first clears such things with his permission council. By making such added traditions and introducing them, maybe even in response to things which have happened in your stories, you can make the city into a character of its own, allowing the players to feel and see tangible changes which might inconvenience or even improve their own lives. Now, with all of that out of the way, please allow me to explain how you, both storyteller and player, might have been missing out on what the traditions can do for you in your political influence game. Now, far be it from me to tell you how to feel about the traditions, but if you feel like they're intentionally there to work against you, let me explain why they are actually probably the most freeing of any of the laws of the damned. Naturally, depending on the prince of a given domain. So we explained what the traditions were. Don't reveal yourself, and by extension, us, to the mortal world. Respect each other's domain, don't go embracing without permission, offer respect to the holder of a domain, and show hospitality, and of course, don't kill each other. Gotta ask, but what's so bad? So long as you don't break these very simple rules, you have been given carte blanche to do whatever you want, mind you, bearing in mind any added traditions by the prince of the city. What's more, these traditions aren't just basic laws to be followed, or add flavor to the city of your game. They are also a vital resource in the Kindred's eternal game. Let's look at the example of domain. If you're some young neonate and you find another vampire trespassing in your domain, poaching, using the domain services, or chatting up the homeless guys. In either case, sure, you can run them out, beat them bloody. After all, the tradition of destruction just means you can't destroy them. It doesn't say shit about not being allowed to break bones and maim. On the other hand, you can approach them, cite that they have violated the tradition of domain, and for this transgression, they owe you a boon. Well, shit, you just might have made a profit off of evoking the tradition of domain. And if you think about it like this, your domain is like your house. It's your private property, and the Camarilla has given you the tool to tell anyone who breaks in to raid the fridge or crash on your couch to go kick rocks. That domain isn't just where you are likely to make your haven, but also to have the bulk of your influence, permitting you to maintain and oversee it, as well as being your hunting grounds, and that too is a resource this tradition allows you to defend. Someone did you a solid. Hey pal, I'll give you the right to feed within my domain. Temporary or not, it can be a solid form of payment. In turn, it means that they too have an incentive to keep other people from messing with your domain. Especially if you're some elder, your domain isn't just a resource, but it may be your feeding grounds where you and your child are need to maintain so long as they are in your care. And that means your domain will need to sustain you both. Last thing you need is some asshole neonate running around, killing people, setting fires, getting into gunfights, and screwing up the prosperity and peace of your turf. And another way you can benefit, not just from the tradition of domain, but in general, is that you can take such transgressions before the sheriff, the prince at a public hearing at Elysium, your primogen, or even the harpy saying, "Hey, I don't appreciate Bruno the Bruja coming trespassing and messing around in my domain." This in turn means the dispute is taken up by the court, and oh yes, the Camarilla has a legal system, and court hearings, and the last thing any clan wants is to be publicly ridiculed for not better instructing their childer to respect the traditions and be forced to owe a boon to the aggrieved party, or even the entire clan. And if you're having a hard time getting a meeting with the transgressor's primogen, because maybe he happens to have a distaste for you, then invoke the tradition of hospitality. Even if it doesn't get you in the door, he can't then say you violated the tradition of domain. A kindred legal aficionado can go a long way. Might even make a boon or two from representing your fellow kindred as a mediator, or before the court, cause they just ain't got the know-how to represent their case. Or hell, take it to the harpies, so they can let anyone with a set of fangs know that that kindred is a bastard with no respect for customs and the social contract you are all to adhere to, and how you, so clever and respectful a neonate, have learned the ins and outs of the traditions. It's easy to smell like roses when the competition doesn't know any better than to use some damn soap once in a while. So the point is, know the traditions, and they too can be cited and invoked for your benefit, either in defense of what you have worked so hard to gain, or to help accelerate yourself up the ladder of the ivory tower. Something else which should be noted, as it seems to have faded entirely from the knowledge of newer storytellers, is that of tenural domain. That being a domain not denoted by physical bounds, but rather by a given sphere of influence. A famous example of this can be found in the domain of London, where, since the conception of the police, the tenural domain was claimed and officially recognized by the prince to belong to the Ventru, ensuring that they have legal claim to the police force and to go before the court should any other kindred trespass on their grounds. Another example can be found in Chicago under the late Prince Loden, who had claims of tenural domain he ensured by evocation of traditions. And the practice is even cited in some character concepts. And what about ghouls? If some kindred kills your ghoul, it may be time to cite the tradition of domain. If for no other reason, then now the sheriff may go hunt that pissy little anarch who's been making unlife hard for you down for killing your property. The principles I have gone over here are applicable to all the traditions as well, not just that of domain. For instance, with the Masquerade, you might implicate a rival of wrongdoing by citing the tradition and making the argument that his business in gun trading, namely in explosives, threatens the Masquerade given the intense scrutiny explosions come under. Or that such trades endanger the sanctity of domain given the damage explosives tend to do to the stability of the local real estate market or economic growth. After all, more than paper made of green, vampires want to be in the liquidy red. And if mortals are too afraid to go out to your club because the asshole in the same neighborhood has been shooting up and setting bombs in his crusade against the criminal underworld, such challenges might be brought to the court in a bid to weaken him, or if nothing else, shut him down and allow you to claim his domain for your own. After all, if your domain is prosperous and stable, inviting population growth, that just benefits everyone now, doesn't it? A clever citing of the tradition of the Masquerade can be an ideal way of slowing down or entirely shutting down a rival. Just be mindful you don't get too dependent on counting on it, because if you bring every little thing to the court, and the powers that be, they're going to lose their patience with you for being the kindred who can't do anything on their own. And what about progeny? Well, a great example can be seen in the politics observed in Chicago and Gary, Indiana, given the conflict, namely between the princes or the given domains. If someone wishes to embrace, they could potentially do so in Gary, and after, return to Chicago, not having violated the tighter ruling of the tradition in Chicago. And what of destruction? Well, varying on the domain, the tradition only extends so far as the kindred of the Camarilla. Yet often, this isn't held true, as more often than not the Camarilla may wish to capture Sabbat or Anarch vampires, so they might interrogate them for information. However, If you happen to be the elder who takes pity on some hapless fledgling, and agree to be their mentor or adoptive sire, you may request the right to evoke the tradition of destruction as though they were your own. Naturally, unless you're quite clever, you will no doubt fall under the tradition of accounting, but that can be to your benefit. If nothing else, it means if the kindred in question has served their purpose, or turns out to be a wasted effort, you are thereby allowed to destroy them, without anyone being able to say spit about your actions. Could be useful if, say, you need a disposable pawn for something. And to that matter, never underestimate the tradition of accounting. While it typically only applies to fledglings' crimes reflecting back onto their sires, ensuring they're educated properly in the ways of kindred society, you might be able to use this against your sire, citing it as you wish not for your actions to reflect on them, for them to render you aid. Oh, but sire, to do this, I need access to those mortal allies you have in the banks to destroy this Toreador's loan, so that I might rise above this challenge. Not only does a sire unlikely want to look bad, but it may also make your unlife a little easier, and provide you with a bit of profit for bending that Toreador over a barrel. In fact, citing that tradition may just be what prevents a situation of owing your sire a boon for the help requested. Just keep in mind your sire when you do this. Try this with the no-nonsense and perpetually angrier than normal, Bruja, and he might just tear your heart out and start over with the next whelp. And if you are the sire, citing the accounting against a rival has its own advantages, but citing it by chance, in regards to your own, now there could be an interesting idea. After all, if you cite that you are only acting in the name of the fourth tradition by rendering aid to your fledgling childer, or giving them a position such as acting as your myrmidon, well then, it's not because you are merely keeping close at hand your easily controlled and useful childer. No, perish the thought. You are merely ensuring you are fully instructing them and keeping them close at hand should they need to be corrected in their behavior, or prove that they are no longer worthy of the blood. And now I shall evoke the tradition of hospitality and request that you show respect to my rulership of this video's domain by liking this video and subscribing for further instruction. Now, if you're dealing with an anarch, member of the Sabbat, then invoking these traditions will take on a different tone. Given neither are beholden to the Camarilla, it's not like you can hold the Bruja Primogen accountable for the actions of an anarch, right? Well, you might. If someone has shown they are too sympathetic or lax on them, you may be able to use the traditions against them for your own personal gain, or just to silence their voice in an argument. After all, once you make that kindred a tradition breaker in the eyes of his contemporaries, he's going to have a hard time winning over any friends. But sadly, the anarchs don't often respect the traditions. Sometimes their tests for those they are recruiting to show their loyalty are to violate them intentionally, so that kindred is screwed with only them to depend on for allies anymore. Killing ghouls, destruction of private property, especially if it happens to be the magnum opus of the prince, or some other powerful kindred, poaching another vampire's domain, this is the norm for them. Odds are, unless you catch them, you can't do shit to invoke the tradition. And if you do, that is your excuse for the harsh punishment you dole out onto their heads. But evoking the traditions to the prince, sheriff, or other vampire of the domain, now this can be how you use them. After all, if the anarchs break it, someone has to go break them. Ain't that the case? If nothing else, you can excuse your actions when you, for instance, evoke a boon on some young kindred to go find that anarch and break both his arms and legs for killing your accountant and torching your car. Now, evoking the tradition of the Masquerade and say that their blatant and violent actions pose a threat to the Masquerade? Well, spoken into the right ears and you might just call a blood hunt down on them. Know the traditions, consider their implications, and observe the circumstances of your new city, and you can get an idea as to how they are regulated. Plus, if you know your history, you might know how the tradition of hospitality might have been used by mortal kings back in the day. Treat your elders to that sometime, and you might just get ahead. This underlines something else which I've mentioned before, that of the unspoken traditions. Naturally, among these there is pre-station. that being another one of the core and even instrumental societal glues of the damned, which, if you wish to learn more about, then I shall refer you to a previous video, A Guide to Boons. But there is also the unspoken tradition surrounding Elysium, that being that no violence is permitted on its grounds, the use of disciplines, at least that are overt, as some are incredibly difficult to notice, are not permitted, and that it's typically forbidden to feed within a block of Elysium's grounds. The larger reason for these rules, or the unspoken tradition of Elysium being unspoken, is that they all largely fall under the umbrella of existing ones. No feeding near the ground so to not risk drawing attention or endangering the Masquerade where the kindred congregate. No use of disciplines or fighting so to not infringe on the traditions of domain or hospitality. And generally speaking, given that Elysium is neutral ground where vampires are encouraged to resolve their problems legally, diplomatically, through some clever machination, if nothing else than merely to congregate and play at being a social butterfly, it is best to ensure its grounds are treated as sacred. Another of these unspoken traditions comes in the way of spreading the knowledge of Nodism or spouting off about Gehenna lore. It's namely unspoken as there are many kindred, particularly paranoid elders, who do so, but also, if no one speaks about it, it's a hell of a lot harder for such interests to spread. After all, there is no such thing as Nodism, Gehenna, or Caine, and any little neonate who asks about it, "Oh, hush, child. That kind of thing is what brought about the Anarch revolt and spawned the damned Sabbat. It's because of all that disorder the Camarilla was found, don't you know?" To finalize our conversation on this topic, let us clear up any lingering questions revolving around the traditions. Firstly, I think it's important to address that regardless of what the Sabbat recruiter may tell you, or the Anarch gang spray paints on the alley wall, everybody makes a habit of drawing in the lines when it comes to the traditions. It is wrong to think that everybody doesn't follow each other's rules sometimes. After all, infiltrators will find it rather hard to play the part when they are breaking all the agreed upon laws. And however shall the scouts get a good gauge of the lay of the land if they're too busy finding out the boot size the sheriff wears when he's laying down the law up their backside? If nothing else, it's going to make the job of that Anarch emissary or Sabbat diplomat a fool's errand when they run amok in town, only to go into their meeting just to get a face full of white phosphorus at the hands of some ivory tower ghoul. The fact of the matter is, even the most hardened Sabbat and boastful Anarch still knows how to play by the rules when it suits them. In fact, sometimes, they even make games of it. Among the Anarchs, a popular one is bearbaiting, a game in which you must, without violating the letter of the law in Elysium, taunt or otherwise talk an elder or respected kindred of that city into an inappropriate outburst. Or, if you feel ballsy enough, into frenzy. In the Sabbat, they make a game of punking you with your own rules. Leave it to them to make a game which, true to form, is quick, bloody, and violent, all while being so simple any shovelhead can join in and do it. It's as simple as performing a gangland drive-by. If the Camarilla Lick doesn't want to get caught breaking the Masquerade for standing after taking a hail of bullets in front of a bunch of mortals, he's gonna have to fall down and play dead. That's bound to complicate matters, if not fuck up his own life enough that he has to leave town. All comes down to how you play it, and if you're a real vicious bastard, step out of the car, give him a wet willy, or kick him in the junk. If you're Sabbat, well, the Camarilla probably had it coming. But games and funnies aside, the traditions are still the most widely known and often followed laws among the damned. Most Anarchs outside of a free state are gonna be in either a Sabbat or more often Camarilla domain, and huff and puff all they want, but you don't see even the Sabbat just wantonly breaking the Masquerade. If nothing else, that's a good way of telegraphing where you are for the Camarilla to send in a hit squad. Now, join us next time when we peel back the layers of how the laws of the damned work when we are in a Sabbat city. Oh, the fun the Code of Milan can introduce to a story. And gosh dang if it can also benefit a Cainite aiming to rise in the ranks. Or just get their way. Even if it ain't from being the best speaker or having the most political of aims.